Okay, so this week we are going to continue on. We started last week our Revelation series called Dragons, Fire, and Other Mysterious Things. I'm just curious, how many of you tried reading Revelation this week since we started? Anybody? No shame if you didn't. Just wondering if you're just like, oh, I want to read about some dragons. No? Cool. Well, hopefully, this one I do say because there's a lot that we have to cover in such a short amount of time. And such a broad overview. I will encourage you this week because we're not going to look at like one specific verse. We're going to try and jump around a bit. So this week, go home and read all these different things. One, because the descriptions of what we were talking about are just really, really good. And you're going to miss it if you just kind of take my word for it. And so I encourage you, there's a lot that we're going to jump at. I'll give you some verses up here that we will kind of just talk about briefly. But I encourage you to go home and read these things because, one, Revelation is that good of a book and that crazy of a book. If you've never tried reading it, there are just lots of different things. And we understand that's confusing. It's written for lots of different purposes and lots of different reasons. There's things that it's talking about that apply to the time that it was written for the people who were hearing it, that they understood what they were talking about, but it's also written for like people like us way into the future to just know and expect what God is doing. And so we introduced what Revelation was last week, and we kind of just did this broad overview, but we recognize that Revelation is this very descriptive reminder for all the people at the church to examine the reality now in order to focus on the big picture of the future. And we talked about, and the big descriptive, like, that's a key word because it really gives this imagery and these pictures and these characters and these battles and all these things that are happening that are just really intense. And even I was talking with Jeff this week, like the images that they use and the descriptions that they use, like it just goes so much deeper than just at face value. Where, we know there's a dragon revelation, but like even just the picture of a dragon goes so much deeper than just like a dragon that we would see like in movies or like How to Train Your Dragon or somehow like Night Movie or anything like that. Like the idea of a dragon is so much bigger than just a dragon. And it's just a reminder like to examine the reality. We talked about that, like examine what is happening in your life. It's written for these seven churches. He addresses these seven churches at the beginning of Revelation, and he talks about the different things that they are going through. And we see when we look at those churches, like the things that they are going through as a church and as a people and as a community in that time are very similar to a lot of the things that we go through now today, with being persecuted, with being teased, bullied, put down, with being having the great experiences, with having things that we worship instead of God. And when we are honest with our reality now, saying like, okay, this is what I'm putting ahead of God, or these are the things that are trying to bring me away from God. These are the things that are going to break in my relationship with God. When we are honest with our reality there, it helps us to better focus and understand what God is doing in the big picture of the future, of like His promises and all the things that are to come, and just everything that's going to be there waiting for us. We understand that better. And so we even just kind of talked about and kind of pushed this idea, at least kind of for us as we dive deeper, because Revelation is confusing. But if we understand Revelation as like this movie with like intense characters and these intense like battles and scenes that are just really good and descriptive, kind of like a movie would, then we kind of understand how like Revelation like moves forward. And so as we talk about a movie, and we look at Revelation this way, what I want to talk about today, kind of like how like a movie opens up, or even like a TV show, and it kind of just introduces all the characters to you. Like you kind of like, it has that scene of the family cooking breakfast together, and like, okay, these are probably like the good guys, and like they're cooking all day, enjoy a nice meal together. And obviously good guys, and like, okay, what these parents are about, and like you see that, and then the next scene it goes into the villain. It shows the character of the villain not cooking breakfast; he's making lunch because lunch is the villain. No, okay, I don't know. But it shows the villain sitting in his lair and crafting these evil plans. You're like, okay, that's the bad guy. We understand what that guy's about. That's kind of where we are at now. Like we are at the beginning of Revelation. We want to understand who the characters are, because Revelation is filled with some very intense, crazy characters all throughout the book. And we're going to give a brief overview of some of them, but we can't dive deep into all of them. But what is important to remember when we talk about the characters of Revelation, that it's not so much about who they represent. Because again, there are some characters who represent like kings and emperors and leaders at that time. And there are a lot of people who get caught up saying like, oh, this character represents this person in the future. So if this person in the future ever shows up, you know that they are talking about the dragon, or you know that they are talking about the beast, or like whatever. And so a lot of people get caught up in who exactly the characters are meant to be and what they are supposed to represent. But more, it's not so much about who they are, but it's what they are. It's what they represent in the story. And so there are some that are easy to like identify, sure. But it's more about what they represent. For example, we'll look at it in a second, but like it talks about the Lamb a lot throughout Revelation. We know and recognize that that Lamb is supposed to be Jesus, because Jesus is called the Lamb throughout much of the Bible. So we see when they're talking about the Lamb, you're like, okay, they are talking about Jesus. That's who the Lamb is. But even more than just the identity of Jesus, it's about what Jesus represents. It represents salvation and grace and redemption and saving us and victory and just power and good. Like there is so much more that the Lamb represents than just Jesus. And so, yeah, we might be able to pinpoint a character, but it's more about what they represent. And this is important because the reason why the characters are so big in Revelation, because when we think of certain characters that it is describing, our idea might be wrong. For example, if we talk about Satan or the devil and angels, maybe oftentimes we think of something like this. We might have this picture in mind, maybe specifically from this movie, I don't know. But you might think of something like this. You might think of Satan as just some, like this guy with the pitchfork and like the horns on the head, the cool finger guns or whatever. If you know the movie, like then you know all the different things there. Or you might even think of an angel like this, where it's like kind of peaceful, it has a heart, has a halo. And then you're like, okay, yeah, I know what an angel is, it's this guy. Or I know what the devil is, it's this guy. And that's not exactly accurate. Because in all honesty, and even more than because this is just a cartoon, but this guy as Satan, I'm not scared of. Or even this guy as an angel, I'm not in awe of. Right? Like, I'm not, if this guy came up to you like, I'm Satan, fear me, you'd be like, yeah, sure. Whatever you say, red tie guy. If you're like, this guy is like, oh, I'm an angel, I'm fighting for you. You're like, yeah, with what, your heart? Like, these guys are not giving a good description of what these characters are, but we often tend to just limit our characters to like pictures like this. So it's important to understand the characters and what are being described, because we get to see like what's really at play. Now, really quick, these are just some examples of bad characters throughout Revelation. This is a lot, I know. We're not going to read all of these. I don't expect you to read all of this. But these are just some examples of the bad characters that you can find in Revelation. I know it's a lot of text. Again, go home, read these things. I'll give you a thing where it has all these listed. But just examples. And the first one talks about stars falling from the sky and locusts coming out of the earth. And the locusts here, I couldn't include the verse. But these locusts aren't just like locusts. It's not just like the bugs. They are kind of described as a man locust, like basically bugs with people faces on it. So just kind of picture like a grasshopper or like a cricket or anything like that, and it's looking at you with a person face. You're like, oh, oh gosh, it has a face. Like, kind of scary. And the way that it describes it is so much more intense than I could include in this verse, but it's like very nightmarish. Second one, it's like talking about the dragon coming out with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns coming out of the earth. Then you have beasts coming out of the sea again with 10 horns and 7 heads. There's actually a couple of different beasts that comes up. It has like, this one describes it like a leopard and a bear and a mouth like of a lion. Again, all these mix of like different animals. Then another beast coming out with horns and like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon. And then there's also like descriptions of the four horsemen, which you may have heard like that represent like different things, like a pale horse, red horse, black horse, coming out and like representing all these different things. Again, you have to kind of read the verses to get them, but that's just a brief rundown of the like some of the bad characters you see, and this is kind of like what they represent. When we look at the major characters, you see these like they kind of represent these different things. The falling stars and the man locust, and again, picture like you go into your bathroom, and you know how sometimes there's a cockroach on the shower curtain? Like picture you go into the bathroom and you see the cockroach on the shower curtain, and then he turns with you with a man face. He's like, hi, I'm the cockroach. And you're like, oh, he talks too. Cockroaches are scary already, but if it had a person face on it, well, maybe. I don't know. But just like they just describe it, man, look, it's like these armies of destruction and death. The dragon's supposed to like represent Satan and like him like unleashing like all his Satan things on the earth. The beasts are the powers and influences of the world that cannot be easily defeated, because it talks about like beasts being shot in the head, but then they still live. Beasts being under control of Satan, and then like some describe it to like the powers and the governments and everything at the time or now, but it's more about like the influences of the world that cannot easily be defeated. And the four horsemen struggles and conflicts that people, especially Christians, will face, because it talks about like famine and war and death that these four horsemen bring, and how it especially affects Christians. All these different, again, vivid pictures, where it's not just describing Satan as a guy wearing red ties and has a pitchfork, but it's a dragon. And not just like a cute dragon like you would see in a kid's movie or anything like that, but this big, ugly beast with 10 heads coming out spitting fire, and like it's huge and just powerful. And so what the bad characters tell us, that they are used to show that the enemies we are fighting are bad, powerful, and dangerous. Exactly, are bad, powerful, and dangerous. That like a dragon coming out of the sea with 10 heads and horns is so much more powerful and dangerous than the guy wearing red ties. Yeah. Four horsemen bringing war, famine, and death are a lot more powerful than the things that we just tend to picture. Like the enemies that we are fighting are a big deal. And that's what it's trying to describe to us. That it's not just a simple character that we need to like, oh, okay, yeah, red tide Satan exists in the world. It's actually a huge deal that someone this big and powerful is constantly trying to fight against you. That a beast is coming to fight against you. There's like, you have to put in a lot of power and work to make sure you overcome this beast. That famine and war are trying to bring you down, and that the struggles and conflicts that we're supposed to face, and we have to like fight to overcome them. But with all the bad characters, we see all the good characters as well. Again, a lot of words. We're not going to read them here, but just a brief rundown of where you can find them. One, you see a lamb with the 7 eyes and 7 horns, and like I meant to have a picture of this, but because of time and all that, there were a couple of like artist visions of like what this looks like, and it was kind of creepy. Like picture going to like a petting zoo, right? Oh, look at the cute lamb, and it looks at you and it has just 7 eyes on its face. You're, oh gosh, 7-eyed lamb. But the numbers here are like perfect, because Revelation plays a lot with numbers, and like 7 is meant to be like perfect. And we see 7 played throughout the Bible, like the 7 days. And just numbers are very symbolic for what perfect is to God. And then we see second one is like martyrs, people who have been killed and persecuted for standing up for God. The multitude, people who just believe in God in general. The woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, giving birth to a child, which we kind of understand as like Jesus. And then angels fighting for God. And so we see what these represent here. That the good characters, what they really mean for us is like the lamb. Yeah, it's representing Jesus and all that he represents. The martyrs, those who have been hurt for Jesus and will be redeemed, because it talks about how the martyrs have been injured and persecuted, but God will bring them up into the kingdom. Those who have committed their lives fully to Jesus, and angels, God's messengers and fighters, trying to get the attention of those who have stopped listening. Because if you look at the description of the angels, it's not just like an angel wearing a robe with a heart. Like they go in and like they fight. They fight the dragon, they fight the beast, they bring hard things and trying to get the attention of those, and it says like they have stopped listening and continue to side with the dragon. And so we see all these good characters, others throughout, but this is just an idea. And what the good characters tell us, opposed to the bad ones, is that the heroes that we have in our story are perfect, redeemed, and authoritative. Like again, using with the numbers and like with the 7, like they are perfect. They are exactly what we need for the reason that we need them. They are perfect, that they are redeemed. They are brought into this place of glory, whereas like the dragon, the beast, they are disgraced and authoritative, meaning that they have power. They have vision, they have direction. They say, this is what you have for your life. Come follow me. They are authoritative, like you would follow like a queen or just a leader saying like, this is what we need to do. And so when we look at that, looking ahead, looking at the big picture of what is happening requires us to honestly understand who is involved what they are capable of, and how that motivates the way you participate. Because again, we know like Satan's trying to like fight against us and bring us down in this world. But again, if you're picturing red tight Satan with a pitchfork, then you're not fully understanding what he's capable of. But if you're picturing dragon Satan coming out of the sea with 10 heads and horns and like breathing fire and like casting stars out the sky, then you might pay attention. And it motivates how you participate. Because we get to decide, do we want to be on the side of the perfect heroes that God has given us, or do we want to be on the side of the disgraced dragons? It motivates how you participate. And so what I want you to do, as we look ahead, think through the enemies that you'll face today or this week. Like, what are the struggles that you'll face? The person at school that will try to bring you down, the stress, the anxiety, relationships at home. What are the enemies that you will face? And be honest with what those enemies are capable of. Because a lot of us struggle, like, yeah, there's going to be someone at school that picks on me, whatever. But when we're honest with that, when we're honest with how it's trying to bring us down, then you are honest with how what they're capable of. And then what happens in knowledge of Jesus and God's love are you investing in order to overcome those battles? How are you actively being on God's side as you fight the dragon, as you fight the beast, as you fight the things that you're fighting with? In what ways can you better equip yourself with what you know you will be facing? Are you going to read your Bible more this week? Are you going to pray more? Are you going to just understand who God is better so that you can fully understand and know what God is capable of as he fights for you? How are you going to better equip yourself with God's side of the battle? Think about this week. Pay attention to the characters and the enemies that you'll face. Pay attention to the heroes that God is sending into your life. Know what they are capable of, and equip yourself with that knowledge and that truth and that grace so that you can go and better fight and defeat those things that are trying to take your relationship from God. We're going to pray, but don't move yet because I have just like 2 quick announcements, but let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we pray, saying thank you that you are constantly revealing to us who is involved with our story, who is involved in the battle all around us, who's involved with our future, what you are doing, what you are capable of, and fighting for us. Help us to pay attention to that. Help us to see the ways that you're working, just to trust in you for our lives and to your name. Be with us this week in all that we face, and continue just to trust all more what we do, just equip ourselves with your presence and promise. We pray in